Welcome to Kerusi Panas, Sabah. This is the third season of Hot Seats, where I look at issues in an election in Malaysia. This particular series is going to focus on Sabah. There are going to be 15 different episodes over the next 2 months. We've seen the Sabah State Assembly has been dissolved, and the projection is that there will be an election before the end of November. We might go into December if things extend a little longer, but it's most likely that we're going to see the polls be held in the next 2 months. In this beginning episode, I'm going to talk about why this election is important, how we can understand Sabah politics and look at our political history, and talk about the things that need to be given attention. Let's start by saying that in Sabah politics, there are actually two different types of contests. There is an election where voters will go to the polls, and then there is a selection of government, which happens after polls. These two things are going to be very important. Why the selection becomes important is because there is tremendous political fragmentation. Coalitions are often formed or reformed, and this is something that we're going to be watching in Sabah politics, because this is the dynamics of very fluid, very complex, and very fragmented politics that the state has. Sabah is a place of 3.4 million people, makes up 11% of Malaysia. It has a GDP value of over 84.3 billion. It is an extremely important economy that depends on agriculture, mining, as well as services. Particularly important is palm oil. The economy and the conditions that Sabahans are facing is challenging because prices are generally higher because of higher transportation costs. Wages tend to be generally somewhat lower. There's also very significant challenges of vulnerability and poverty in Sabah, disproportionately the highest concentration of poverty in the country. That makes Sabah a very different and unique society, combined with its multiple ethnic diversity of many groups, especially local communities, that make Sabah a fascinating place, brings so much through its pluralism to Malaysia itself. There are 1.7 million voters who will have an opportunity to vote when the time for the election arrives. The election serves an important test. These are why Sabah's election is so important. Foremost is the opportunity for Sabahans to choose their government, to have their voices heard, to be seen. I cannot underestimate, when I speak to Sabahans, the sense that they feel that they are being left behind vis-a-vis Sarawak, vis-a-vis Peninsula Malaysia. There's a sense with marginalization. There are communities that are being marginalized within the marginalized communities of overall Sabah. This particular election allows attention rightly to be on Sabah, to be able to focus in on the issues that matter, particularly basic needs, infrastructure, and the representation of different communities. Equally important is that this is a test for the unity government and for the coalition. We had a test in 2023, and that test involved how the unity government worked together. Pakatan Harapan and Barisan Nasional, led by UMNO, managed to cooperate, and we saw the voters gave them a degree of voter transferability. That meant that the supporters of their respective parties and coalitions did give a fair share of their vote to the other members of the unity government. In these 6 state elections that happened in 2023, what we saw is while the unity government lost political support across most of the states involved, in many cases losing 2/3, making a significant erosion of support, generally it was a test that the unity government survived reasonably well. There was no strain and impact on political stability. In this particular contest, the challenge is somewhat different. Instead of alliances working together, they're actually, in many ways, working together through deals. At the same time, they're competing against each other. Now, it's not uncommon in this particular circumstance in Malaysian political history, where we have governments at the state level be different from that at the federal level. Johor is a good example. DAP in Johor is in the opposition. But what we do see here in the case of Sabah is that for the first time, members of the federal coalition are competing against each other on the ballot. And in fact, there are some that are working together in new alliance relationships. But there are different types of alliances that have been taking place, which is the coalition, which have been involving months and months of negotiation that continue to be, at this juncture, negotiated among the different major coalitions, be it the GRS coalition, which is the Sabahan Local Party Coalition, Pakatan Harapan, led by Anwar Ibrahim, and Barisan Nasional UMNO, led by Zahid Hamidi. We'll see how these coalitions resolve who contests where, but we'll also see how the campaign takes place and the strain that might come from a campaign that pits different parties in the federal government who are working together at the state level. I think it's very fortuitous for Malaysia that this is happening in Sabah because Sabah has much more culture of civility. There's friendly contests that are taking place. And while you can guarantee that there's going to be a degree of political heat, especially where you have longstanding rivalries, the reality is that we're going to see a very interesting dynamic. This test will be interesting to watch, not just during the campaign, but what the consequences of what that might be in terms of who did well and who didn't do well, whether or not that will put strain on the political system post-election. The third and major issue is that this is a competition for leadership. The tenure of Haji Noor, who is now the caretaker government leader, he was chief minister from 2020 to 2025 and leads the GRS coalition, will be tested, and there'll be lots of discussion about his leadership, whether or not it should continue. We'll see questions of the corruption scandals, the issues involving Justice Brazara, the tragic 13-year-old who has died, and what are the issues involved there, tragic floods that have taken lives, 14 people died. These issues are shaping and transforming the discourse in very unprecedented ways. There's a lot more political mobilization. There's some deep emotions, and they tie in to how the leadership is going to be assessed. Equally important is the issue of how the federal government is assessed. This is not just a competition for leadership of the state, but it's also how the role of the federal government has been perceived, the management of the economy, and its treatment of Sabah. Given that Sabah has a strong history of Sabah nationalism, and this has grown in the last 5 years, it's impacting and shaping the narratives of different political parties, be it the STAR, led by Jeffrey Kidingan, or Warisan, led by Shafi Abdal. These factors of issues of competition, of leadership, and the narrative that they represent are going to be very important. From the voices of Sabahans and the composition of the different governments at the federal and state level, as well as the nature of leadership, these elections will matter. To understand Sabah, we need to look more carefully at Sabah itself. We need to examine how can we understand Sabah politics. First of all, it's complex, multiple parties and communities. The smaller communities are not so well known. People talk about the Chinese, or whether or not there'll be a political swing, talk about the splits within the Muslim community, which had 4 major coalitions going to be competing compared to 3 that was in Peninsula Malaysia. the tremendous choice that exists among the voters, the parties that are appealing to the native communities of the Karasandusun, Rungus, Tidung, Sungai, all the other many long lists of the 36 major ethnic groups that exist, and there are a lot more. Political parties are very numerous. They appeal to different communities and very different localities. The local seat dynamics of the 73 seats under the contested are going to matter. There's also variation within Sabah itself. People talk about the east and the west coast, but there's the interior, the urban core, the north, the south. These are things that we're going to unpack in the various episodes to help understand what's happening at the local areas and some of the differences. Sabah also has a history of political fragmentation. It isn't the same as Peninsular Malaysia, where we talk about ethnic polarization from ethnic voting that divides society and sharp differences. What we see now is a legacy of divide and rule, a splitting of different communities, and at the same time, local ethnic mobilization really matters. We're going to look and unpack some of this fragmentation and what this means for the political outcomes that are often very state-centered. We also have the centrality of the federal-state relationship, the importance of revenue issues, support for political representation, the type of relationship, different perceptions of political autonomy. These are things that are very much at the core of the Sabah nationalist discourse, only perhaps echoed in Sarawak. Is very deep, highly personalized politics, both at the elite level and also in the relationship and the voters have with their respective candidates. Outsiders tend to look at Sabah and focus on the negatives, the need for infrastructure, the questions of the roads, very serious and very important challenges Sabah faces from the perspective of governance and allocation of resources to the ground, to its people. But at the same time, there's also not enough attention to the blessings of diversity, the rich democratic culture that exists amongst culture of civility. We're going to be looking somewhat at that, hoping to transform how Sabah is understood, a place of tremendous aspiration and tremendous optimism. Just a brief few minutes on the political history that's taken us to this election. The last state election was in 2020. It was timed in a way that Sabahans will never forget because it brought in with it a COVID pandemic, which created an epidemic in Sabah. That has created its own trauma. Many people remember that very deeply, the experiences that happened after that poll. But electorally, what we saw was a change in the state government, who had been led by Warisan from 2018. Warisan only managed to win 32 seats, which was not enough. So there was a new formation of a new coalition that allied itself with the federal government at the time, Perikatan Nasional. The new coalition was Gabungan Rakyat Sabah, GRS, and brought in Haji Noor as the chief minister. The idea of post-election coalitions has become increasingly common in Malaysian politics, but it has been especially common in a place like Sabah that has so many political parties, and that coalitions are necessary for it to govern, and that will be likely the case that we see after this polls as well. In 2022, the coalition of GRS faced another test. That was when Perikatan Nasional government did not form the national government. It was formed by Pakatan Harapan in forming the unity government in coalition with different partners in Barisan Nasional. And one of those partners became GRS to the state government led by Haji Noor, allied itself with the Anwar Ibrahim-led unity government. That meant also a reconfiguration, an expansion, bringing in a Pakatan Harapan into the state government, changing some of its composition. Few appreciate that Pakatan Harapan members in the government in Sabah have only been there for less than 3 years. The state government faced another test in 2023 politically when we had something called the Langkah Kinabalu or the Kinabalu move, which transformed the government when elites in UMNO and Warisan came together with the effort to potentially push out the GRS government through a different coalition formation. It did not get the support to do that, in part because a number of UMNO members left and joined the GRS. They have had a limbo status. They will be facing interesting tests of where they go in the election that's coming. It also led to pressures to put in an anti-hopping law, which has been approved. That has created a dynamic which will constrain the choices for the post-election representation. In looking at the significance of why it's important, appreciating the variation within Sabah's politics itself, and also the dynamic political history, we're going to be taking you now on a journey in a discussion of Sabah politics through the hot seats, understanding why Sabah politics is not only fascinating, but very important for the representation of Sabahans, for test of Malaysia's political stability, as well as political democracy. It is going to be a very important discussion. I'm really looking forward to these conversations that we're going to have about Sabah politics. I'm hoping that you will enjoy the conversations with me.